Well, hello, my master naturalists. It is day 2 of I Spy Adventure Camp, and I'm so excited to dig in to this week's lesson and activities again with you. So make sure you grab your box and all the things you need. Just like yesterday, you're gonna need a pen, a notebook, you're gonna need your activity workbook. That's the one that says I Spy Adventure Camp. And you are going to need your green bag. Remember, everything you need for today is in that green bag, so don't worry about the purple bag, don't worry about any of the other ones, just grab that green bag and make sure it's the plain one. There might be a patterned green bag in your box. That's for another day, so make sure it's the plain green bag. Grab those things and I'll see you right back here to dig right in. Ready? Let's go.
Hey everybody, welcome to day 2. Today we're talking about plants and trees. So our theme verse, if you can remember it again, it's going to be up on the screen. Luke 12:28. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? Today's special verse is Matthew 6:28. And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? They do not labor or spin. Keep rewinding that and play that one over and over. That's today's verse. So enjoy that. Our welcome poem today is, you can put the welcome poem up on the board if you want, or on the screen. And there are going to be underlined areas. And if those underlined areas, you come up with a new idea, rewind the video and then play that poem over and put your new word in there. Welcome to the forest, to the plants and the trees. Welcome to the ferns and the mosses and the leaves. Welcome me and welcome you to our outdoor adventure space. Using curiosity that God gave you, look at all the green things in this place. God created plants and God created you. Each and every creature is his handiwork too. I Spy Adventure Camp, woohoo! All right, today we're talking about what is a plant. If you look all around me, you can see green. Everything is green. Every color of green that you can imagine, from bright, I would say kind of a fluorescent green to a dark forest green. So what is a plant? A plant is a living organism, such as trees, shrubs, herbs, grasses, ferns, and mosses, typically growing in a permanent site. They're anchored to the ground. They absorb water, and they also absorb other inorganic substances, which we'll talk about later, through their roots. And they synthesize the nutrients in their leaves, and that's called photosynthesis. That's why we call it synthesizing, using the green pigment, and that's called chlorophyll. So plants reach upward to catch energy in the sunshine. So how many types of plants are there? Basically, there are only 2 types of plants. There are plants that don't make seeds and plants that make seeds. Plants that don't make seeds make what are called spores, which are dust-like particles. They spread their offspring far and wide, and some fall on good ground and some don't. Plants that make seeds reach upwards to catch this energy in the sunshine, and they make juice in their leaves, that's the chlorophyll, and they provide nutrients for the whole plant. That's called photosynthesis. You can see that there are plants that don't make seeds and plants that make seeds. Some of them have true roots and stems, and some of them don't even have real roots or stems or leaves. And then there are others that make cones, and there are others that make flowers, and some of them don't make flowers. So let's talk about plants that don't make seeds. The ones that have no true roots, they're pretty cool. They're called algae oftentimes, and sometimes if you look at the lake here, and a fish just jumped out behind me. Algae is that greenish plant on the top, and it is really green right now because it has had lots of sun. So there's a lot of photosynthesis going on in there. It feeds mostly off of the water bacteria. There are other types of plants that don't make seeds as well, and that don't have true roots. And those are fungus and mushrooms. And some of them, you can use your magnifying glass to look at a little clearer. I've got a big picture of a fungus here. This is called a turkey tail fungus, which is pretty cool if you look at it. It almost looks like a turkey's tail, the way it fans out. I also have another really cool fungus right here, which I got a long time ago, so it's a little dried up. And there's also some pictures of some different mushrooms that you can see as well. So a symbiotic relationship is a relationship between two species that help each other out. Algae and fungus are two of those, and that's where you get lichen. So lichen is a cool thing too. We're going to look at that today as well. Here's lichen. Take a look at that. If you look really, really closely with your magnifying glass, your I Spy glass, you will see there's like just a little world of creature type growth in there. And that's what lichen is. All right. So fungi, they're not true plants because they don't grow by a seed. So they're a species of themselves. Fungi and mushrooms and lichen feed off of dead plant material. So you notice this fungi here, the turkey tail mushroom, they call it. Mushroom and fungi can be used interchangeably. So they feed off of anything that's rotting. This came from a rotting tree. And if we didn't have these types of spore-like plants or species of their own, fungi and mushrooms, we would notice that all these things that are decaying wouldn't decay. These help to eat them up, and then that way the other animals and insects can come in and do their job. Okay, so do you know there's also a poisonous mushroom? Do you know what that's called? I'll give you a hint. Here's a riddle. A brown hopping amphibian sits on it. What's a brown hopping amphibian? It's a toad, yeah. And it sits on a stool, a toadstool. So toadstools are the only poisonous mushrooms that they have kind of a bright red on them. So anything that's a poisonous mushroom is called a toadstool. When the spores settle and decay, they produce these fine little threads, and you know what they're called? They're called hi-fi, like your stereo system. They are like little strings. And the top of a mushroom, what do you think it's called? It's a cap. Right. So let's talk about fungi. They hug the soil to get nourishment from decay and rot. Fungi feed off of dead material, and then the bugs come in and do their work. And without them, the forest would be buried in dead organisms. Decomposition is a part of the life cycle. That helps replenish and fertilize the earth for new growth. All these materials work together in a symbiotic relationship. And you know now what symbiotic means. Yeah, one depends on the other. So they help each other out. Sometimes it's for good, and sometimes it's not. So how many of you have compost piles? Think about a compost pile. And what's the importance of worms in a compost pile? Their casings are really important. They break up the dirt. If we didn't have worms, it would be really hard. So we're going to talk about that on Friday with the insects. All right, what kind of habitat do all of these species, the fungi and the lichen and the mushrooms, live in? What kind do you think they like to grow in? Really dry places like Arizona, or really nice moist places close to a lake? Yeah, it's more moist, bare, rotten logs and tree stumps, streams, wet conditions, swamps, bogs, marshes, and shady, moist areas. Those are the areas that they like to grow in. Okay, we talked about plants that don't make seeds, and some of them have true roots and some of them don't. So we talked about the ones that don't have roots or stems or leaves, and those are the algae and the mosses and the fungi. So now we're going to talk about ferns. Okay, so ferns are plants that have roots, stems, and leaves. Mosses have some roots, stems, and leaves. They kind of fit into both categories. But let's talk about ferns, because I'm sitting in the ferns right now. These happen to be ostrich ferns. Can you guess why? Think about an ostrich feather. How does that look compared to an ostrich feather? Almost identical to an ostrich feather. It actually has alternate leaf stems here, because it looks like it's side by side, opposite, but there's a little bit of an alternation there if you can take a look at it. It's a beautiful leaf, really beautiful. So ferns grow clusters of tiny brown cases. As the cases dries out, it splits open, and then those spores, we talked about those spores again, they burst open, and what happens is they burst into the air and they land in all different spots. And what are the buds on the tips of the ferns called? Up here? Those are called fiddleheads. And that's a cool name, fiddleheads, right? You want to kind of play a fiddle and it just pops out at the end. And these are the only ferns that are edible when you have the fiddleheads in the spring. All the other ferns, even though they look like little fiddleheads, are not edible. These are the edible ones. But don't even go eating any ferns that you see in the forest. It's just not safe. So ferns have no flowers, and they reproduce using spores, like I said. And when you're thinking of the typical big fern plant, like this one, what it does is, by meiosis, it produces spores, and they have half the number of the chromosomes of the big parent plant. So like a little baby plant, just floating through the air. The spores are released in the wind, and if the spores happen to land somewhere suitable, they grow into what's called a gametophyte. And that is a whole separate individual plant. It's tiny, and it's maybe the size of your tiny fingernail, and it's a thin little small green plate, and these spores depend on water to move around. So where do you think you'll find ferns mostly? What areas do you think you'll find them? Deserts, forests, or wetlands? Wetlands. So now take a look at the fern list that we're going to show you. And there's so many different types of ferns. You're going to see two pictures. One picture is the sensitive fern, and if you take a look at it, it is definitely more sensitive. It comes out a little bit later in the season because it's sensitive to cold, and it's also sensitive to people stepping on it, so it's a very sensitive fern. And then the other one is the ostrich fern. You'll see a picture of that as well. But take a look at all those ferns and see which fern you might have in your area, or maybe in the woods where you walk. Okay, we're going to talk about mosses now, because they also belong to that group that we were just talking about that don't have seeds. So a moss, you'll have a little video of this moss sample that I have here. It belongs to a family called bryophytes, and they have very little roots and leaves or stems. And they belong to the mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. And this group is the second largest group of plants in the world. There are 15,000 species of them because we don't see them that well, and they're miniature. Now, there are 548 species of mosses alone in Ontario. You're going to see a picture of the 30 most common ones that I've put up there for you. And then we're going to show you a picture of the turtle that looks like a stone. Can you guess what kind of turtle that is? See how covered in moss he is? So moss loves to live in very wet areas. So if you take a look at moss, moss can last for hundreds of years. Even this moss here, I can just put it in a container and it lasts for many, many years. There's a moss collection in the Smithsonian Institute, which is in Washington, and it actually is 100 years old, and it's the same moss that they picked 100 years ago. So moss lasts for a long time. It might be a great thing to put in your treasure chest if you find some. All right, so now the difference of different plants we're going to talk about next. Talk about the second part, plants that make seeds. We talked about plants that don't make seeds. So look behind me. You can see all these amazing trees. They all came from a seed. Those seeds came from either flowers or they came from cones. So plants with no flowers are called conifers or coniferous because the word cone is in them. So there's a few pine trees right behind me. Those are coniferous. They don't lose their leaves. All right. We have jack, spruce, cedar, pine. We have all sorts of coniferous trees. Most coniferous trees are called evergreen. Most of them are always green. They don't lose their leaves like the other trees. Those are called deciduous. So the deciduous trees, you can see one behind me and another one there. There's a really big one. That's a walnut. It's a cross between a walnut and a hickory. They can grow very, very big, and they usually have fruit or nuts that are their seeds as well. So they also lose their leaves in the fall, and in the winter they look pretty bare. So what animals feed on cones? Can you think of what animal you see in a tree that would feed on pine cones? Squirrels and chipmunks. And they help to pollinate by spreading the seeds from the cones when they drop them, and sometimes when they bury them. Plants with flowers and seeds, well, I think we all know those. We've seen lots of beautiful flowers. You can even see some flowers. Actually, you can't see them right now because it's almost dark here. And we have some beautiful water lilies on the lake, and they close up at night. Isn't that the coolest thing? So they're going to open up and the sun shines. But plants with flowers have seeds in the fruit or in the flower part. So most plants produce dust-like pollen, but not spores like the other plants we were talking about. Pollen doesn't develop on its own. It is used to fertilize the plant's eggs. So the pollen, each fertilized egg grows into a tiny plant inside each seed. So flowers help to reproduce for their plants. And most flowers are really bright, and sometimes they smell nice. And do you know why that is? Why they're bright and why they smell nice? Well, and sometimes they even taste good, believe it or not. Well, it's to attract what we call pollinators. Pollinators are, can you guess? They're the insects, that's right, that land on those plants. And those insects, the pollinators, are, bees, butterflies, and sometimes birds, and lots of flying insects. Could be flying beetles, could be dragonflies. Yeah, all sorts of insects. An oak tree is, it's home to 350 species of insects and many, many animals. They change with the season and they're deciduous. And one tree can produce up to 90,000 acorns. That keeps a few squirrels busy, and birds as well. The leaves on the trees use the sunlight to make food, and that sunlight becomes food for the leaves and the trees, and that's again called photosynthesis. The fruit on an oak tree is called an acorn. It ripens in late summer and produces a hard-covered fruit called a nut. Sometimes birds drop the nuts, and the squirrels forget where they buried them, and guess what? Then next year you have a new oak tree. There are more than 250,000 species of different flowering plants in the world. Now, you're going to try in the next activity that we give you to differentiate which one of the pictures that we gave you in your activity book about plants that make seeds and plants that don't make seeds. Okay, so you go right ahead, you cut out those pictures, and you put them in the chart. Do they make a seed or do they not make a seed? Think about the flowers. Think about the nuts. Those are all seeds, all right? Think about the ones that aren't as green. Those are not seeds. The ones that are on trees and decaying matter. All right? Okay, we'll talk later. Now that we've had our plant talk, we're going to do our I Spy activity next. Go to your nature book and find the I Spy activity and enjoy that one. I think you'll really have a lot of fun with it. Okay, the next activity on our list after our I Spy activity is planting a bean seed. Go to your workbook and see if you can find that sheet that says how to plant a bean seed, and just have a really cool time planting your bean seed. Take some pictures of it if you can, and maybe send it to us so that we can see how your bean seeds come after about a week. Should be about 5 days and you'll see your bean seed coming up. Our next thing on our list is Beverly's Craft on pet rocks. All right, so go find Beverly's Craft. I think there's a link there that you can click on, and she has instructions on how to do a pet rock. And I believe it's going to be a fruit or a vegetable or a flower, and you can choose any of those links and make your own pet rock. Next up is our Bible story from Pastor Ashley on the sower and the seed.
Hello again, boys and girls. So by now you've had a chance to hear your nature talk, you've done some rock painting, some fun activities, and now we are going to learn about a story from the Bible all about seeds. You've learned about seeds already, but did you know there's a really awesome story in the Bible all about seeds? Well, we'll get to that in just a second. But yesterday we talked all about all the wonderful things that God created. And you see, today we're going to learn some more about one of those very awesome things that He created. You see, right after God separated the water from the land, He created the plants. And all of those plants have a special purpose. Do you know some of the special purposes or special jobs that plants have? Well, if you said food, you are right. You see, in Stratford, we're surrounded by fields and crops, and those crops grow things like corn and wheat and soybeans and all kinds of other fruits and vegetables and food, not only for us, but for animals too. Does anybody know one of the other jobs of plants? Well, if you said that they produce oxygen, you are right. We need those plants and trees to produce oxygen so that we can breathe. You see, without that, we wouldn't even have a lesson for tomorrow. I'm just kidding. But tomorrow we're learning all about mammals and how we need that oxygen. So without plants, we wouldn't have the oxygen to breathe. They all have such an incredible purpose for us. So up on the screen, you're going to see a picture of a whole bunch of seeds. I want you to take a look at this picture. A lot of plants produce seeds like these that you can drop into the ground and then they'll become new plants. If we look at each of these seeds, do you think you can tell what kind of plant it'll grow into? Probably not, but I'd expect an apple seed that would be red or, a yellow daffodil seed to be yellow, but unfortunately, that's not the way it works. If you don't buy the seeds in a package, then you probably can't tell what kind of plant it's going to become, unless, of course, you're an expert on seeds, and I'm not. You'd also expect that maybe a bigger plant would have a big seed, but you know what? Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 13, verse 31 to 32, the kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. The smallest of all seeds, but when it was grown, it's larger than all the garden plants and becomes a tree so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. So we really can't tell what kind of plant it's going to be, but God knows, and in each tiny seed, He's placed a set of instructions that tell it exactly what it's going to look like. And we call those instructions DNA. And every living creature, including you and I, has its own DNA, which is like an amazing computer program that God has designed. It's pretty incredible how unique seeds are, isn't it? Well, next up, we're going to take a look at some seeds of a sunflower and a moonflower. And they couldn't be more opposite. I'm going to show you a video of a moonflower. Here it is. So this grows in a garden and it's called a moonflower. If you were to watch tulips or crocuses or daisies, you'd notice that the flower stays open in the sunlight and it closes up at night. Most plants love sunlight, but not the moonflower. This video that you're watching right now was taken in the evening just as the sun was going down. And unlike most plants, it comes out when the sun goes down, and then it dies by morning when the sun comes back up again. Although the plant is not a very pretty plant, you see the leaves, they actually look a lot like a dandelion. Well, this flower itself is very beautiful. And the most amazing thing is that you can watch the flower open up right in front of your eyes in about 30 seconds. So that's the moonflower, and it hates the sun. But next up, we're going to talk about the sunflower. And what do you think? Well, it loves the sun. If you've ever paid close attention to a sunflower, you'll notice that it changes the direction of the flower to follow the sun's path. Here's a time-lapse video I want you to see. If you were to watch the sunflower over the course of the day, you're actually going to see it turn its head and face towards the sun all day long. How cool is that? You see, the moonflower hates the sun and closes up, but the sunflower loves it and follows it all day long. So boys and girls, at the beginning, I promised you a story from the Bible all about seeds. And now we're going to dig into that. This is from Matthew chapter 13, and we're going to read verse 3 to 8. This is the story about the parable of the sower. Starting at verse 3, it says, "Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came up and ate it. Some fell on rocky places, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But then, when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 160 or 30 times what was sown." How cool is that? 4 different situations, 4 different places where those seeds fell, and 4 different things happened. But what does that mean? The disciples ask the same question, and we get the answer in verse 18 to 23. So still in chapter 13, flip over to verse 18 to 23. Jesus said, "Then listen to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is someone who produces a crop yielding 160 or 30 times what was sown." What kind of seed do you want to be like? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Well, I sure want to be like seed number 4, and I'm sure you do too. Boys and girls, let's think back to the moonflower and the sunflower for just a second. Remember, the moonflower didn't like the sun, but the sunflower always followed the sun. We're going to read a verse from John chapter 8, verse 12. This is what it says, John 8:12. "When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, 'I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life.'" Now let's think to those seeds. In each of those 4 seeds, something different happened. Some of them, their roots didn't grow deep enough. There was no place for their roots to grow. Some of them were choked out by all the other weeds. And that's what can happen to us. All of these things come up in our lives that take us away or don't allow us to grow deep in our relationship with God. Distractions come. We don't have people to help us and surround us and teach us what it is to be a follower of Jesus. But we want to be just like that sunflower. You see, that sunflower always faces the sun. And we need to be just like that. Just like John 8:12 says that Jesus is the light of the world, we need to face him. We need to follow him, read his word, follow his example, because he is what's going to help us grow just like that sunflower and that fourth seed that grew 30, 60, and 100 times what was planted. Let's be like seed number 4 and those sunflowers that are always following that light. As we finish our lesson today, I want to read to you from Matthew 6:28. Matthew 6:28 says, "And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? They do not labor or spin." So boys and girls, I want you to remember how much God cares for those seeds and those plants, the flowers and the trees all around you, and know how much more He cares about you. Let me pray with you. Jesus, we thank you so much that you care so much about us. God, we thank you for all the things that you created and the ways that we can learn from that and the things that we can do to grow. Lord, we pray that you would help us to look to you just like the sunflower does. And just like those seeds, we pray that you would help us to grow our roots deep and to watch out for those distractions and those weeds so we can grow 30, 60, and 100 times in our relationship with you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
And next we have our songs. Be like a tree. Enjoy those songs and go for it. Dance, sing, whatever you want to do. Be like a tree. Well, thanks for listening in today and joining us. It was a lot of fun learning about different parts of plants and the different types of plants with seeds and without seeds. So we're going to close off with our goodbye poem. And you can see that there's spots where there's underlines and you can fill in the blanks if you want. So rewind it a couple times and make up your own poem this time. Goodbye to the forest, to the plants and the trees. Goodbye to the lichen, to the fungi and the leaves. Goodbye to me and goodbye to you, to our outdoor adventure space. Thankful for the creativity God gave you, exploring all the green things in this place. God created plants and God created you. Each and every creature is His handiwork too. I Spy Adventure Camp,